Hello, welcome to my channel, Dalma Makes. Welcome to this project. I made a miniature fireplace. Previously, I made a comfy little armchair, and I thought a cozy little fireplace would be a perfect match. To make this fireplace, I'm working with foam core. It's an extruded foam material between two sheets of paper. Cardboard could easily be used instead of this material, but because I already have it on hand, I'm going to use it. I'm first taking measurements and trying to figure out exactly how to construct the basic shape for the fireplace. And I have an image in my mind of what I want it to look like, and I've also looked at some real fireplaces on Google. I am actually using a glue stick to glue the parts together because they have this paper coating on the outside. It's just the perfect adhesive for this job. For parts that are not covered in the paper, I am actually going to be using hot glue instead. Using the glue stick actually helps with not adding any bulk or bumps. I'm sort of constructed this typical arch, rectangular arch that is very common with fireplaces, and I'm also adding a top that kind of is larger than the base. And I'm using just a scrap piece of cardboard to construct the base, and I used cardboard because I didn't want to add any more height to this piece. And also the corrugated cardboard is very good at being bent into shape when you want to work with arches. And I'm using hot glue to add these pieces to my construction. That's kind of where the actual fire is going to go. Now this basic shape is pretty rough. So I am making a mixture of tile grout, PVA glue, and water. And I'm making it quite thick, like a paste. And I'm going to plaster the entire piece. This is going to fill in all the gaps, smooth out any irregularities, and most of all, it's going to make it very easy for me to add texture to the surface of this piece so that it doesn't look like foam core. It's going to look like simulated stone, or at least that's what I was hoping for at this stage. So I'm just basically working this paste into all the nooks and crannies and covering all the surfaces, and then I'm using this little plastic spatula to like tap on the surface to create these little peaks that settle into smoother, bumpy surfaces. So then when it dries overnight, I actually get this nice textured surface. As a base, I'm going to be using a black acrylic paint to prime the entire piece. I want it to eventually look like gray stone, and for this I'm just going to use straight up black for all the cracks and the undertone to be nice and dark. After the paint has fully dried, I am going to be using a big fluffy brush and these three colors. The first one is kind of like a basic brown, and I'm going to be generously going all over the entire surface except for the inside where I want it to stay black as if it's coated in soot. I'm using brown first because although I'm going for gray, I want to have these warm undertones, and that's why I'm using this darkish red color. It's called Fired Brick, which the name was very inspiring for me to make those colors have a little bit more variation. And now I'm going in with this light gray and dry brushing gently, just catching all of the edges and that bumpy texture. And at this stage I realized that yes, I was right. The application of the tile grout mixture and the play with the spatula gave me the effect that I was aiming for. To add a little bit more interest and to make it look really old, I'm going to be adding some cracks to the stone of the fireplace, and I'm just using straight up black acrylic paint and a detail brush for this. Maybe they're a little bit heavy-handed, but hey, it's my first time painting cracks like this and I like the result. Now for the inside of the fireplace, I am going to be using these tiny black rocks that actually look like little lumps of coal. And I want to create a scene where the fire is already burnt out and there are these warm embers left behind. I don't want to waste a lot of my tiny rocks, so I placed a scrap piece of foam inside to fill in some of the space, and then applying more PVA glue, I'm just gonna sprinkle on these tiny rocks and cover the inside. Now to set them in place, first I'm spraying them with some isopropyl alcohol to lower the surface tension, and then I'm applying a generous amount of watered down PVA glue. And when this dries, it's going to be rock solid and those little rocks are not gonna go anywhere. Of course, I want to paint those embers, but until that glue dries, I'm going to work on the elements that I'm going to put on the mantelpiece. I have this little tiny frame that's handmade and it's old and I lost the top piece from it, so I'm going to remake it with a section of a matchstick. I'm just cutting a little bit to length, and then I'm cutting it at an angle so that it fits to complete the frame. And I'm also going to be carving it a tiny bit to match the profile of the other wood bits that make the frame. And when that fits, I'm just going to glue it on. Next, I want to add a lace doily to the top, but I don't like it that it's stark white, so I'm just going to spray it with this stain ink. It's called antique linen and it's going to dry a lot lighter, so it's just going to look like yellowed old lace. I also want to use this little vase. It's actually quite pretty, but I want it to match the color of the little armchair that inspired this whole thing. So I'm using some blue and green paint. First applying generous coat of the blue, and then while the blue paint is still wet, I'm just using this bright green sparingly, kind of like mixing them together right on the brush and on the surface. And I think the result is a color that matches the armchair perfectly. If you want to see how I made the armchair, I'll leave a link in the description. And next I want to also add the candle to the mantelpiece, and I have this candle that's made out of a thumbtack and a piece of clay. The clay is coming up the wick a little bit too much for my taste, so I'm just cutting off a little bit from the top so that the wick is a little bit more visible. And I'm also going to be staining it with this yellow miniature wash. I don't want it to be stark white, and I think this color works well for an old-timey candle. I'm also going to be adding melting wax to it. I want it to look like it's been used, and hot glue happens to be perfect for this purpose. So I'm just carefully adding it on. I also have this little tiny trinket box that I put some moss and stuff inside to look like potpourri. And I'm also going to be using these two little books. They don't open, they have foam inside, but the covers are really nice. And I just inked the edges so that they look a little bit more aged. I also have these 3 tiny potion bottles that I think would look perfect as vintage perfume bottles that the granny might have kept because they're beautiful. And I'm using a brown miniature wash to go over that vase from before, just to redefine the grooves in the pattern. And I'm also using the brown miniature wash to go over the gold elements of the perfume bottles, because I didn't like that very bright stark gold. Now that the glue on the frame has dried, I am going to be painting it black. It was originally this silver color that doesn't match my environment now, so I'm just painting the whole thing black. And when that dried, I'm just adding a tiny bit of bronze, sort of like gently dry brushing it. And I think this way it kind of looks like an antique old frame. I struggled a little bit to think of what to put inside, but in the end I used this tiny printed out image of the Vitruvian Man, Da Vinci's sketch. It's not very thematic, but I couldn't think of anything else that I could put in there, and I didn't want it to be like someone's face. So I'm just adding a small piece of black cardstock to the back and then gluing on the tiny little image, just carefully with the tweezers. And then it's done. Next, I want to actually have flowers in the vase, and I'm using an HO scale flower plant thing, and I'm fixing it in place with hot glue. Now that all my elements are ready, I'm going to start gluing them down on top. First, adding the now dried lace doily that looks nicely aged and just how I wanted it. And I'm gluing it down in the middle with just a tiny bit hanging over the front. I think lace doilies are reminiscent of how our grandmother's houses were often decorated, and I really like that. To one side, I'm going to stack up these two little books. I like the idea that they're just temporarily there and they were forgotten there. And I'm also going to add a piece of sea glass just because it's something that I have in stock and I love finding uses for them and having them on display. It could be sort of like a paperweight. I'm adding the vase to the other side and sort of trying to figure out how to arrange everything else in a nice cluster. The picture frame goes kind of in the middle, and so does the candle, but I need to use hot glue to fix down the candle because the base is metal and PVA glue doesn't catch so well immediately on metal bits. I'm just using a golden bead so that it looks like another little trinket, and then I'm fixing down the perfume bottles with a mix of PVA glue on the tips of the findings and filling in the middle with the hot glue. The hot glue will grab on immediately, but the PVA glue will dry permanent and assure that those little things were never going to fall off. In the end, I ended up not using the box as it would have been too cluttered. And here it is. And my little fireplace is almost done, except I want to paint the embers, but first the glue must dry. So until then, I've decided to make a little bonus miniature. I have this lovely little woven basket. I didn't make this, I just had it in my miniature collection. And I wanted to make it into a knitting basket, so that the granny who lives here has a place where she keeps her current knitting. And I thought I'd make a miniature yarn ball out of real yarn. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just winding up a tightly coiled little yarn ball. I also wanted to have something else besides the ball, and of course I'm not going to knit a miniature thing, so instead I'm just kind of making a, I don't even know what to call it, like finger knitting or finger crochet. I'm just making one string so that it has some sort of woven texture, and I'm going to be strategically gluing this down around the edges so that it looks like there's something else there besides the yarn. For knitting needles, I'm going to be using straight up sewing pins because they're the perfect size at this scale. And of course, I'm gluing everything inside so that it's permanent. As I said, strategically arranging that woven string, and then adding my tiny ball of yarn just how I like it. I decided that I want to color the ends of the knitting needles this bronze color, and then changed my mind and recolored the silver pins themselves. And then I'm just simply poking them into the yarn ball, kind of making sure that I poke the sharp ends of the pins sort of into the basket. This will help me with keeping it in place, and also from accidentally poking myself when handling anything in this miniature diorama. I have completely forgotten to turn on my camera when I painted the embers. I just used some acrylic paints in red, orange, yellow and white to make the embers look like they were just burning out. And I also painted a little bit of yellow glow in that hollow of the fireplace. And now you can have a better look with some still photos of my miniature fireplace. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I have a lot more miniature projects on my channel. Please go ahead and visit. And if you'd like to see more content like this from me, please consider subscribing. Thank you for watching. I hope you're having a nice day. Bye.